My name is Amy Hyman.
Nathaniel Whitmire.
Austin King.
And our project is over degenerate art during the Third Reich. And so on our first page, we really go over the term degenerate and how it came about. It was first used in the early 1890s as a biological term, meaning that something was so altered or so mutated that it no longer resembled its own species. And so after the end of World War I, the term degenerate was being applied to works of art, specifically the New Modernist movement. And this included not only paintings, drawings, and sculptures, but also music, film, and literature. Now, the National Socialists during the Third Reich used the degenerate art as kind of a propaganda. It was really a political move. They decided that because modernism was already one of the disliked works of art, according to the German people, then they thought that by declaring the modern arts as degenerate, they could draw more support into their new government and kind of distance themselves from the old Weimar government. And so what was the criteria of determining whether an art was healthy or degenerate? Well, healthy art was anything true to the motherland. It was very domestic. It emphasized not only the German country itself, but it also emphasized farmers and a strong work ethic and being tied to your own country and your own culture. It was anything traditional, anything classic, whereas degenerate was anything chaotic or anything unrealistic. It also included anything that was connected to communism or Judaism, and included such genres of modernism such as Cubism or Impressionism. And so if you'd like to later come up, we have 8 pictures on this page of famous or relatively well-known pieces of art. And our challenge to you guys is to see if you can figure out which one of the 8 are degenerate. And we'll supply you with answers, don't worry. And then finally, what happened to the art after it was labeled degenerate? Well, once it was forcibly removed from the museums in Germany, it was put into a traveling exhibition that went on for several months, and it got millions of visitors. After the exhibition was closed, most of the art was sold to foreign private collections or foreign museums. However, we do have documentation that some of the art was burned publicly in Berlin, and also some of it was lost during the bombings of the Second World War. One of the interesting topics I'd like for you to consider is, because the Germans were so anti-modernism and they wanted to eradicate their own country of the degenerate art, did this actually promote the popularity of modern art in the rest of Europe and in the rest of the world?
Okay, so mine is over jazz music / swing music. Now, before we talk about its suppression, I'd like to bring up the Roaring '20s. Now, 1919 was a very big year for the world, and can anybody tell me why? Anybody at all?
It's over.
What's over?
World War I.
World War I is over. Now, this is a huge boom for the world, not just for the United States. Even Germany is a boom. Now, we see economic prosperity for much of the globe. We see inventions that have never been around before, like we're starting to see the modernization of electricity. We're starting to see radios. We're starting to see wholesale cars. We're reaching cities like LA, London, Berlin, Paris, Detroit, Chicago, Montreal, and New York. And these places have become socially aware and culturalized in the new era, okay? And what we would call the modern era. Modern women's being redefined, as the flapper. So, an interesting look to our standards. Now, between the years of 1919 and 1923, jazz spread quickly throughout the country of Germany. And by 1924 and 1928, jazz had reached one of its peaks now, its popularity. Jazz music, with its high spirits, fun, and originality, was viewed as non-Aryan. Its roots of jazz were thought to be an American institution and represented the American lifestyle, and therefore were not welcomed by the Nazis, who labeled the music as degenerate. Until around the mid-1930s, jazz music was left alone to do as it pleased. People seemed to really like the music. Much of the Nazi propaganda, such as recruitment reels, had jazz and swing playing in the background. So even the Nazis were smart enough to realize that they can use this to their advantage. To a certain extent, in order to satisfy the taste of the majority of the listeners, jazz was even played over the German radio, and in 1935, a law was now passed banning jazz from being played over the radio. But this had little to no effect over the country because the Nazis had no way to enforce this rule. Besides, the Nazi definition of jazz music was so unclear that it was virtually impossible to define. So now we reach an era called the swing era. And this is now we've reached the pinnacle, the top in Germany, and this is in 1936. Now we reach the Second World War. And once it is officially started, listening to any Western labeled radio was now against the law and subject to punishment. Many of the musicians in Germany had been forced to enlist in the new Nazi military, and any non-native/black musicians were shipped out of Germany. It seemed a dark time for the music in Germany. What I'd like to play now is an official piece by Richard Wagner. This is the true taste of Aryan music. This is one of Hitler's favorites. Now, I don't know about you, my spirits aren't exactly high, but I do feel like invading Poland a little bit. Now, don't worry though, because we see a beacon of hope for jazz music. It survived, and then amongst the darkness, there is hope for the culture, a society known as the Swing Kids. These kids comprised of German Aryan families, or non-Aryan families, ages 10 to 17, the ones encouraged to join the Hitler Youth who opposed the regime and resisted through music, keeping the culture alive and well in the underground, even at the expense of punishment. So with the absence of jazz culture from the German people for so long, one can't help but ask the question, what sort of impact did the suppression have on the European culture? And now I'd like to play what would be degenerate music. Do we have any swing dancers out there? Anybody wants to dance with me, then sure. No takers? All right. That completes our piece.